Do you know who the requested absences are?
Councilmember Freelon, I know he is one that requested an absence, and I'll need to double check email, and I'm not sure if everyone copies me or not, but I know at least Mr. Councilman Freelon has requested an absence.
All right. And then, yeah, so I guess in that case, then we can move on to the action on minutes. So yeah, I believe the chair sent out the minutes earlier today. Yesterday, it looks like I have here. And so hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at them. If there's any concerns, changes that anyone needs to bring up.
Quiet group.
All right.
So I did not receive the minutes. You said he sent them out yesterday?
Yes.
So I did not receive them.
I just see the agenda. I don't see the minutes.
So there was an agenda that went out.
Oh, you're right. Yep.
The agenda went out on Friday. So the thing for the minutes, Matt, so we went back to try to pull the minutes and the transcript would not come up. I don't know if it's time limited. There's a time limit to pull the minutes because I wasn't at I came in late to the last meeting. And so LeVon could open, I couldn't open them either. And so we were going to request, I think LeVon was going to request a resubmission of the transcript.
Oh, okay. That's it's quite possible they are now limiting the time that we can save some of the stuff in Zoom. So I can follow up on the the transcript access. We could just table that table this adoption of the minutes since we don't have them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and thanks for correcting me on them going out yesterday. I was just quickly glancing at my email and saw the email from him with an attachment and just kind of assumed. So that's my bad. So yeah, thank you for correcting me there. And then we can just table this and hopefully we'll have minutes next meeting that we can approve for both this meeting as well as the January meeting. And so in that case, then I will turn it over to you, Matt. I believe you are going to go and do the annual action plan update.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Wilmer if she might chime in on that. She's been in heavy annual action plan mode. Wilmer, are you here, Wilmer?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. You want to just do a
I do a quick, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. So it is that continuing to be that time of the year as we prepare for our FY 21-22 federal entitlement program funding and our application to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for those funds is our annual action plan. Most importantly, I want to say that we're having a second needs public hearing on next Monday night, March 1st, City Council meeting at 7 p.m. This is a time for all Durham residents to participate regarding their input on what they believe and feel to be the needs of the city of Durham. Be reminded that those 4 entitlement programs, Community Development Block Grant, Home Investment Partnerships Program, Emergency Solutions Grant Program, and Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, with the exception of the last, are all for specifically residents within the city limits of Durham. Housing opportunities for persons with AIDS covers 4 counties, and that's Durham, Orange, Chatham, and Person are the counties for which those funds can serve individuals who meet the criteria as it relates to having HIV or AIDS to be eligible for the HOPWA program. The draft annual action plan is scheduled to go on review on or about March 19th and will be available for public review for 30 days until about April 19th, at which time the public hearing on the draft annual action plan will take place on April 19th, and we will certainly properly notice the residents of Durham regarding the meeting, the public hearing on the draft annual action plan on April 19th. The plan is scheduled to be adopted on May 3rd at that city council meeting. So that will be the adoption of the annual action plan. So if there is some discussion that warrants some minor or some type of adjustments or amendments to the draft annual action plan, that will be done between April 19th and will be hopefully revised to where it's camera ready, and the residents of Durham and City Council agree that it is ready for adoption. Typically what happens, we will have a certain amount of time statutorily. The annual action plan is due to HUD by May 15th, unless there are some extenuating circumstances. And I'll come back to that in just a moment, but just on a normal schedule, the plan is due 45 days prior to the grantee's end of fiscal year. And so our fiscal year is July 1. Once we submit the plan, HUD typically has 45 days till about mid-July to approve the plan. If we do not hear back from HUD within that time frame, it is typically the position of HUD to state that if you have not heard back with regard to disapproval, a grantee can consider the plan approved. So if that's said, we would hope that we would receive that approval or some response from HUD by mid-July that the plan has been approved without any modifications. And then sometime, if we're lucky, in September, we would receive the grant agreements for all 4 of the entitlement programs. And then basically we get underway with developing contracts based on requests for proposals that probably have been received and evaluated earlier in the year. So I want to just digress back to the comment that I made, unless there's some unusual circumstances, that May 15th date is statutory. However, here is one of the things that will make a difference. So we have not yet heard, HUD has not yet announced the final funding amounts for those respective 4 entitlement programs that I talked about. So right now we are working with proposed funding based on our current year's funding. So the guidance that HUD provides basically tells grantees, do not submit your annual action plan or your con plans until the final funding amounts have been published. In that instance, that will impact the date in which a grantee may or may not submit its annual action plan. So we have not yet been informed of what the final funding amounts are, but we're moving forward with the planning process. So HUD says, try and just make this as simple as possible. Once the funding amounts have been published, a grantee has 60 days subsequent to the date that they were announced, or I believe it's no later than August 13th. So whichever date happens first, that's when a grantee would be required to submit its annual action plan. So in summary, it is likely that May 15th may not be our drop dead date, but we position ourselves to move forward with the plan. And then we will build in contingencies as it relates to the amounts. So if the funding amounts are more, we have language to speak to where the additional funding will be deployed, or if it's less, we will build in language to indicate what categories will be reduced. And that basically concludes my update with regard to the annual action plan. Are there any questions?
Just one quick question. I know you said it's going to be publicly available, but will you be able to send it to all the committee members so we can look at it if we have any questions for next meeting?
You're talking about the draft annual action plan?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the draft that you said goes.
Okay,
public.
so what will happen? We will send that out via the listserv, which CAC members are a member of or included on that listserv. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that'll work.
Yes. So everyone, to my understanding, is included on the general listserv, and certainly we can make a concerted effort to just send it out to the Citizens Advisory Committee, and that just means you'll get notification twice. Okay? Are there any more questions? Matt, is there anything you think that do you want to add?
No, I think you hit all the high points. Just reiterate that the public hearing on Monday, we are expecting some citizen participation. And on that, we've been coordinating with neighborhood improvement services to be a little more deliberate in our outreach and make folks aware of this opportunity to provide comment on the needs for the annual action plan.
And
that's all.
okay, and I will say that a notification was sent out this afternoon via the listserv. So most of you, or I hope all of you, would have received notification regarding the March 1st needs public hearing. And just so that we try and do our due diligence, we will send out another notice on or about Friday of this week as well. And earlier in the month, the notice was sent out via KPASA newspaper and the Herald Sun on February 10th as well. So if there are no additional questions, that concludes my summary of the update for the annual action plan for FY 21-22.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conyers, for the update. I guess now, Matt, back to you. I believe you've arranged for the CO for the Durham Housing Authority to give us a little overview of their work.
That's correct. And I just want to acknowledge, I believe the chair joined while we were talking there. Mr. Chair, are you on now?
I am on. Apologize. Technical difficulties. Thank you, Brian.
No worries. Just
I
wanted to acknowledge.
hand over control to you now.
Rescind it.
Uh,
Send it back.
And so, Mr. Chair, I'll defer to you. I stopped sharing my screen, and Mr. Scott and a team of folks from Durham Housing Authority are available if we're ready to move forward with that.
I think we've already, I'm assuming that we've approved the minutes. Well, there was an issue with the minutes.
We have
that on the record. I don't know if Ms. Watts, I see Janice is here. For whatever reason, we could not get a transcription of those minutes or part of the minutes. I don't know if there's a time stamp of when you're,
Yes. Yes, sir. We spoke about that. I think there may have been the city Zoom account is now limiting how long we can save, some of the recordings and stuff. So I'm gonna have to follow up on that. And the committee decided that they'll just defer approval of the minutes till the next meeting. I'll have
I
to
appreciate
find
that.
those, find the recording.
Yep, and that's it. We can go right into Mr. Scott. I see brother Anthony Scott over there. Good brother. You muted.
And Mr.
Good brother right there, right, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, sir, I am. How are you, Mr. Chair?
Doing well. I appreciate you asking.
Excellent. I will share a screen now. Can everyone see that?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Oh, actually, before I did this, I should have introduced Mr. Anthony Snell. He is our Director of Development. Rather than me turning it off and redoing it, we'll introduce him at the end. He's been with us now for a couple of months and has taken over all our development activities. So I thought that it would be a good idea. Obviously, we want to talk about our development activities, but I thought it'd be a good idea to give you an update overall of DHA, particularly since we've been quite popular in the news of late. Just so you would be aware of the efforts that we're making to address some of our repair issues that have been so popular in the last couple of months or so. So first up, I wanted to talk a little bit about our public housing, give updates there, talk about the DDMP, and a little bit about the shared prosperity, which is tied to that, and then some information on other sites. Oops. McDougall Terrace, January marked the 1-year anniversary of our McDougall Terrace emergency. Although technically it sort of started in November of 19 and began in earnest in January once we understood the magnitude of the issues. We ended up spending about $3.7 million on actual hard cost repairs. That include everything from replacing appliances, electrical, mechanical work, plumbing. We had to redo the ventilation system for the heaters. We replaced all heaters. We replaced all but 128 stoves from gas to electric. We will do the remaining 128 once the COVID-19 has subsided. Rather than keeping people in hotels for several more weeks, we were right in the midst of COVID when the McDougall Terrace crisis started. It started for us in early January. And everyone knows, of course, that March is when COVID began, but we still didn't get our last family home until the first week of May. So rather than having families out during the COVID onset, we opted to halt replacing the 128 gas stoves with electric stoves until after COVID would settle down. And I should just mention, it is no greater danger. The stoves work fine. They're either brand new or close to brand new. But we knew that a lot of residents were uncomfortable with the gas stoves. So we opted to switch them over to electric. On the other side of the ledger is all of the cost of having to relocate people to hotels throughout those 4 months. And you can see the total cost and the associated cost was well over $5.3 million for a combined total of just over $9 million of cost for the McDougall Terrace emergency. And just so I am clear with everyone, even though we have solved for the carbon monoxide issues there, we also brought in neighborhood improvement services so that they could inspect each unit and determine if there are any other health and safety issues outside of the potential carbon monoxide challenges. And they signed off on each unit that met minimum health and safety standards before we could move a family back. But even with that, there were still numerous work orders that needed to be completed in order for us to get the units to where we want them to be. Unfortunately, because of COVID, however, we were placed in a position where we had to kind of halt routine work orders because we didn't have the proper PPE. We didn't have masks at the time, or gloves, or in some cases booties. And so between March and around August is when we were only doing emergency and urgent work orders. We were not able to do any of the routine work orders. until we got the PPE, which we ultimately secured in August, and then we were able to begin work again on doing routine work orders. Well, you can imagine during that period of time, our work orders just continue to pile up. So as of today, we currently have about 865 remaining work orders that are outstanding at McDougal. And again, none of these are urgent or health and safety related, but they're work orders nonetheless that we want to get cleared. So we've started by increasing staff. We brought in temporary workers to fill vacancies. We're also working now to get more contractors on board. We've also stepping up the contractors that we have to get licensed contractors rather than just someone who says that they're a contractor, because what we've seen is that some of the work that has been done has not been up to par. Any questions on McDougal before I move on? Okay.
Oh, Mr.
I just,
Scott.
yes.
Hey, sorry, I was just finding my unmute. It's Carl. Hi. I was just going to
Hello, Mr.
ask,
Newman.
because I was thinking about this the other day, as I was reading about Councilman Freeman and Councilman Middleton's efforts in this sort of UBI pilot program. I was wondering, although I was there at the start, I don't know how it ended, if any kind of data was being collected about the stipends and the folks who received them, or if there's any way to sort of think about sort of the results of the folks who received a stipend during the relocation.
When you say results, in what way?
I guess I could imagine that there's data that you always keep about residents that you could map. So like, are they still, you know, a resident? Are they still a resident at McDougal a year later, say? There's probably not a more robust data collection effort, and I'm not trying to give Ashanti work, I promise. So.
Well, again, I'll pass it on to Ashanti. I just want to make sure I understand a little bit more about in terms of what kind of data. I mean, obviously we know what residents received as stipends throughout this process because we did track all of that. And we certainly, you know, as a matter of course for DHA, we always know what people's earnings are. But I can tell you that the rental payment rates are certainly down at McDougal.
Of course.
And this is a major concern, of course, because of, you know, obviously there's been the moratorium in place, which is supposed to end at the end of March. We have already internally extended that date to be the end of June. And our particular efforts are between now and then are to try to work with all of those residents who have outstanding rentals payments and to work with them on, at minimum, establishing a payment agreement so that they will now be in compliance. So they may not have paid all their money, but by establishing a repayment agreement, that will put them in compliance.
So I have a follow-up to what Carl was saying. I'm going to assume this is what Carl meant, and if I'm wrong, Carl, just let me know. Has DHA kept track of how many residents were caught in the beginning of the crisis, still residents now?
I'm sorry,
my question is does DHA track the residents who were involved in the crisis in the beginning and whether or not that they are still residents of McDougal Terrace now a year later?
Yes.
Okay. And has there been much turnover from those residents who were there in the beginning to this point?
No, there's not been an unusual number of turnover that has occurred.
And then one other question was, when we talk about the 865 outstanding work orders, can you give me like a array of what those work orders consist of?
Well, it could be anything from, say, a crack in a wall, or you know, a toilet might be loose, or a sink may be loose. It's a variety of different things that exist, and I can't tell you like groupings of those, but I'm just giving you some examples of things that I've personally sort of seen myself to tell you what they were. So again, none of these are health and safety related because those are things that we addressed right away.
Right.
And when we had NIS involved with this directly, then that was the key to make sure that they were clearing any of the units of any health and safety issues. But it's a variety of things that are not considered health and safety.
And one last question, it's a privilege. How many, I would say, personnel is on staff or working specifically on McDougal on a regular basis when it comes to clearing the work orders?
That is a great question that I can't accurately answer, but I can tell you from memory what I do know. There's the property manager, there's 2 assistant property managers, there's a what we call a work order clerk or housing clerk, sorry. There's a maintenance supervisor, and I believe there are 3 or 4 maintenance techs or maintenance workers.
Okay. And the reason why I ask that is because I do hear from residents all the time about a lot of the issues that they're having with management. And I live in an apartment, and I know the issues that I have with the management companies here about their timeliness or their response to when a work order gets put in to by the time it gets completed, things of that nature. What are the assessments that you see, or does DHA have when it comes to how fast they turn over once a work order gets put in to when it is completed?
Right. So we do track work orders in terms of 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days in terms of how long it's taking those work orders to be completed. So we do track that on a monthly basis. And let's just hold for all of the issues we face because of COVID, right? Because COVID put us even further behind, right? But let's put COVID aside for a second. Prior to that, we still were seeing large numbers of work orders that were more than 30 days old. Like you should be able to get your work orders completed within 30 days. Now, a large part of that was that we had a significant number of vacancies. I think we had maybe 10 or 12 vacancies in the property management area. And those vacancies have been, there for a long time. It didn't mean every single position was vacant for 10, for a long period of time, those 10, but just that we constantly had about 10 to 12 vacancies in the maintenance side between people leaving or retiring and those sorts of things. We have struggled mightily with trying to hire qualified people. In fact, I think it was year before last, in 2019, we instituted a test that we would do for maintenance workers so that we could make sure that we were hiring qualified maintenance workers rather than just somebody who said they could do the job, but we needed to verify that. This was all part of the process of us trying to dig in deeper to understand why we were having so many particular issues with that field. And this was in consultation with our maintenance supervisors. And we talked about, doing a test. In fact, I made all of them take it just to see if they thought it was the type of test that they were comfortable with, or did it need to be more stringent or less so? And they all felt it was a good benchmark for us to have. But the flip side of that is that we found difficulty in getting people who can pass that test. When you think about property management, and you have a job advertisement out there, and you're a maintenance person, and you see that Durham Housing Authority has an opening, and the Van Allen has an opening. The competition that we have in this area is such that we're going to lose that person to the Van Allen. And overall, I can tell you that property management in the Triangle, and this is not unusual for the Durham area, it's across the country, right? Property management is one of those areas where you typically see a lot of high turnover. In fact, housing authorities tend to have more stability in their turnover than the private sector. And a big part of that is because we offer benefits that they don't. But here in the Triangle, with the amount of competition we're seeing with new housing development that's coming up, it's been difficult for us to find good quality people. So one of the things that we did also back in 19 was just, okay, let's do a comp study and make sure that our compensation is on par with what we're seeing in the private sector marketplace, because that's really who we're competing against. We're not competing against Raleigh Housing Authority or Greensboro Housing Authority. We're competing against the Van Allens and the Bull Houses and et cetera, right? So those are all things that we've put in place to try to solve for this challenge of being able to hire good talent. So post-COVID, what we've also been able to do, I brought in an HR consultant who's been able to work with several temp agencies in the area to actually bring us now qualified temporary workers to fill those vacancies until we find qualified permanent workers. So that's been working out pretty well over the last, say, 4 months or so. Hope that answers your question. It wasn't too long-winded.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I will move on. And this is still part and parcel to the same discussion we were just having. And I mentioned before the impact of COVID, right? We had to stop between March and August until we got our PPE in place. And so we were able to do that, and then we were able to pick up our pace on dealing with our work orders. What we're calling the Hoover Road model was actually something we started in 2019, but got thrown sort of sideways because of the efforts around Medulla Terrace. But the idea is to inspect all of the units at every site. In this case, Hoover Road, which is 54 units. So we were able to bring in a third-party independent inspector that has the same criteria as HUD requires housing authorities to have. So they went through each of the 54 units, determined what was needed to repair those units and bring them up to basic standard. As I mentioned earlier, we've hired temps. Temps are going to help backfill those vacancies that we have, and we're bringing in additional contractors that will be taking on those work orders. When we did those inspections, we end up generating 200 and I believe 97 work orders at Hoover Road. We're going through each of those units methodically. We've started that process about 2 weeks ago with doing the repairs in those units. We're doing this in coordination with the residents. Oh, and the other thing that we're doing around this is that we're providing each household with a copy of the results of that inspection so that they can verify that we covered everything. Sometimes they'll see things that inspectors don't and vice versa. So that we have an agreement between the authority and the resident of all the things that are wrong within that apartment. And then based on that, we'll have the contractors come in and they are now doing the repair work in each of those apartments. The time frame for completing the work range from as little as a day to as long as 7 days of work in different units. So I'm calling this the Hoover Road model because this is what we started in 19, got interrupted by the McDougal crisis. And it's effectively what we did at Medulla Terrace as well when we brought in NIS. But we want to do this at each of our sites. The other piece of this is you see that last bullet, which is bringing in additional contractors. We need to do procurement to hire contractors so that they can get in and do the work. And that is, we've had contractors, as I said, on procurement before, but again, the quality of the work that we're seeing from those contractors has not been up to par. So we're looking for licensed general contractors to lead this work that we're doing. Any questions on sort of how we're approaching our repair challenges? Pausing, making sure everybody got off their mute. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next item now, which is to talk more about DDMP, which is the DHA's Downtown and Neighborhood Plan. The last time I came before you, I gave you updates on where we are with this. And just to give an overview again, this involves about over 50 acres of land. There are 447 existing public housing units within these 3 circular areas that we're talking about. And it involves 3 different public entities. DHA has 6 sites that it owns. That's the Liberty Street Apartments, the 519 East Main Street, formerly Oldham Towers, our DHA office, Fayette Place site, Forest Hill Heights, and JJ Henderson, all represented in that kind of dark reddish color. Inclusive though in this is also 2 sites that the city of Durham has. One is the Southside Phase 3, and up at the top north, you'll see in blue the Hunt Street Station, which is currently the offices of the Community Development Department. And then one other site in consideration is the Criminal Justice Building site that is directly adjacent to DHA's offices. So that is the overall scheme of where we put together for the DDMP. The end result of that, I'll kind of go through. One of the key things with this effort is fully utilizing the Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD program. So RAD is a lot of things, but one of the things it's not is a program that provides additional money from the federal government. It does allow us to switch from the public housing subsidy to the housing choice voucher subsidy. And if you recall in some of my previous talks, I explained how the voucher program and the public housing program are funded entirely separately. You can't use public housing money to do vouchers. You can't use voucher money for public housing. But the one thing about these 2 programs in their being funded separately is that one is primarily a private sector subsidy program. That is, the voucher program utilizes the private sector for the most part. And our opinion, and when I say our opinion, this is public housing authorities across the country. Because of that, you rarely see on an annual basis when they make their funding choices, you rarely see that the voucher program doesn't get its full bevy of money. That is, everyone who has a voucher continues to get funded each year by Congress. On the public housing side, though, what we have historically seen is that Congress tends to make different choices about the existing public housing stock because it's not a private sector instrument and it's a public instrument. It's owned by a public body. And that's why we've seen the cost or the investment in public housing continue to drop over the years and at best be inconsistent. So the 2 primary programs that get funded in the public housing program is the operating subsidy, which pays for your, keeping the lights on, doing your repairs, those sorts of things. And then there's a capital fund. The capital fund pays for your major repairs, placing a roof or placing a building system. And you've heard me talk about over the years that for the capital program, which is the one that is most critical for the ongoing maintenance of a property because it's dealing with your bigger systems. With that program, HUD did a study in 2010 that showed that they had underfunded the public housing units across the country by $26 billion. That number now has ballooned to, when you look for cost for inflation plus just additional delinquency that's happened, to over $60 billion for that 1.1 million public housing units. They came up with the RAD program, which was really a program that was initiated by housing authorities, but they supported that because they thought this was in fact a good idea in terms of how you could bring additional money to renovate or in some cases redevelop public housing communities. So DHA is using this program as a part of our DDMP, and frankly, for all of our public housing sites, we're intending to use the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. And essentially what it does from a subsidy standpoint is it switches from the public housing subsidy over to the housing choice voucher subsidy. The housing choice voucher subsidy has been consistently funded at about 99% or higher each and every year. We think those are good odds for us to make sure that we have the money that we need to maintain our properties under that program. And that's why DHA is actually full on with the RAD demonstration program. Are there any questions on any of that?
There are some questions in the chat.
Sure.
First question is regarding McDougal.
Yes.
Is there a time frame projected or target date for DHA to catch up on the work orders? Good actions to improve. And And then what targets are we driving towards? What is success? So I'll let you answer that one, and there's another question.
Well, I'm going to start with the last question first. Success is that we have no back work orders, that we are completing our work orders within 30 days or less. So it means first and foremost, catching up on the 1,500 outstanding work orders that we have right now that are out there, and that we maintain any new work orders that come in each and every month. That is success. Based on what staff is able to do in the last couple of months, we think that once we get caught up, that they should be able to maintain those work orders, because we've seen last month we had 1,000 work orders and we were able to clear 1,000 work orders. So the staffing, when it's fully there, plus the assistance we would get from outside contractors when we need it, would allow us to maintain those work orders on an ongoing basis. In terms of a target, the easy answer is as soon as possible. I cannot give you a specific day because the amount of work that has to be done hasn't been fully determined once we brought in the contractors. And most critically, though, we don't have those contractors under contract yet. We're currently doing the RFP to get additional contractors on board. And once we procure them, then we will have a pretty clear game plan as to how long it's going to take. For Hoover Road, we were able to do that because that was a relatively small site. And we're going to do the same thing with Medulla Terrace as well. And I think there was maybe one other in there.
Within that question, I think it was and really you can tell me whether or not I answered the question appropriately. Well, I think you answered it. So I'll go to the next question. It's how are quality of life repair concerns escalated? A loose sink and an inoperable plumbing have different levels of urgency. And from resident perspective, those things don't get addressed until they go to the media. And that was definitely a great question to be asked. So how are quality of life repair concerns escalated? And again, a loose sink and an inoperable plumbing may have different levels of urgency. And from a resident perspective, those things don't get addressed until they go to the media. So how do you address that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason that anyone should have to go to the media or to advocates or anybody else. That they should be coming to that management office first and foremost. And then, as I've said, repeatedly, if they're finding that the management office is not able to serve them, that they can contact my office so we can figure out where the breakdowns are. Let me try to be clear about the systemic breakdowns that we've had in our operations area. What we found is that what seemed to be routine systems haven't worked the way they should. We've gone and spent a lot of time in figuring this out as to what's going on. That's why I talked about the temps that we're bringing in and the contractors that we're bringing in, because what we found is that one, the quality of work hasn't been acceptable. And so we're holding people accountable. There have been people who were employees of DHA that are no longer employees of DHA because of some of the things that have happened. And we will continue to make that clear to our staff that anything less than the service you would provide to your own household is what we'd expect that you provide to our residents. And that's a message that we've been making very clear to our staff of late. And honestly, we're at a point now where we are testing our staff to assess what their skill sets are. We're redoing our job descriptions. All of this is happening right now. So over between now and April, well, actually we've done the testing already, but between now and April, we're going to do the follow-up testing. We're producing new job descriptions, and we are going to be holding folks accountable that if they are not performing their job at the appropriate level, then we will take the necessary disciplinary action to deal with that. And so accountability has been significantly ramped up as we've dug in to assess just why are things not happening in the way in which they should. and
Right.
breaking down those systems, making improvements to those systems. We're changing, for example, we're looking at bringing in a third-party work order system so that all work orders are going to a third party. Therefore, we are sure that those work orders are getting into our work order system. One of the complaints that I've consistently heard is, well, I called in and they say they don't have my work order. Well, we're gonna deal with that by having it go through a third party. So the RFP is on the street already for that third party work order system entity, so that we can get down to holding people accountable.
And just to follow up on, that was Ashley's question. I want to make sure that I recognize Ashley, who asked a great question. I think part of all, for the majority of all of us on this committee, we all do community-centered work outside of being on this board. And one of the bigger issues is that accountability piece that residents feel that when they reach out to the property managers, that the response time is not appropriate. And then they'll reach out to your office and the response time is not appropriate. I mean, you are the person that's on the top of the food chain when it comes down to it. And a lot of the issues that, obviously exist in all DHA properties predate you, but you're in the seat. And so I agree with what Ashley is saying here, where she says, I have to be honest, I'm very frustrated that my fellow residents are living in these conditions. And at some point, this has to be unacceptable to all of us. I think that residents feel that because they live in DHA properties, that their concerns are not valid. And that might be based on history, and it also might be based on the fact that when they try to advocate and reach out, they're getting a deaf ear. So how do you clean that up outside of saying that we're gonna get third party and we're gonna the hiring process? Like, I hear you, and I want and I'm gonna support you, but at the end of the day, these are things that should have been concerns and addressed prior to the CO2 stuff. When you walked in, like when you're meeting with residents or your property managers are meeting with residents, are they actually taking the feedback that the residents have back to you, and are they being addressed? Because that's how they feel they're not being addressed. So that's just
So the first part of that, well, let me answer that in a couple of ways. So yes, there are some things that are certainly been problematic before I got here. But I'm here now, and it does sit with me. And part of what we've been doing in this last year really is breaking down and tearing up this property management system that exists. And I can talk ad nauseum. We can take a whole hour to talk about, or more really, to talk about what the breakdowns have been in the system. And so some of the stuff that I talked about already speaks to how we are going to be able to fix those systemic issues. When residents are calling that management office and they aren't getting responses, that's been the part of what I've got to understand, because residents say, I called, property managers say, we don't have that information. So it becomes to some degree a he said, she said. That's why a third party system will allow us to better track that. And I don't have to worry about whether or not it landed at that management office. I'll know for sure where it landed because we're going to track that through a third party. And then there'll be no excuses about a work order not being inputted in our system because of whatever the reason might have been. When residents contact my office, I do want to address that, though. That is something that I make sure that gets followed up on. And so I made sure that when I get complaints, I'm able to make sure that my staff are following up on those complaints. Sometimes I follow up personally, but I obviously can't do that for all of them, so that we can cut down on these disconnects with these folks. One other thing I'll just say is that I now have a chief operating officer, which we didn't have until a few months ago, and Ms. Danita Johnson, who ran the Housing Choice Voucher Program, who's done a phenomenal job of turning that program around. I remember a time when I first got here, that was the program that everybody was talking about. And that's, so she's been elevated to the COO level, which includes all of the property management section. So we have, I can't tell you how many meetings and calls and strategy sessions and changes that we're making and trying to put together the same sort of diligent effort to fix our operation side as we did with the voucher side. So, you know, all of the things that I'm hearing from the questions are true. But what I'm committed to doing is making sure that we can address this. And again, when it comes to holding people accountable, it is, you know, taking the necessary disciplinary action to make sure that people are either taking this seriously or will take that disciplinary action up to and including termination if necessary. I believe you said there was another question or two in the chat.
I'm just reading.
I can't see the chat.
I'm trying to read. They're also in the chat, and I don't know whether or not, sometimes they could be questions or comments based on what you're saying.
Right. And I can't access the chat with my screen sharing.
Yeah. Again, this is just, I'm assuming this is a comment. At this point, people want confidence that they are being heard. People in the positions to make changes are doing everything in their power to fix what is wrong and not relegate the reasons why we are here. Relitigate the reasons why we are here. A year later,
Right.
does it feel like we are further along in these conversations?
Right. So one of the things that I am trying to do is make sure that our resident council leadership is being more in touch with my senior staff team. So we started that with Hoover, where we're having monthly meetings with that team. So again, we're trying to work out the kinks to how we can do this across the entire agency. And that will allow, for one, so I can hear directly from residents and not have to hear it sort of third party or filtered or what have you, but to hear directly from them. And I, you know, a lot of residents know that I'll pick up the phone and call them or stop by and talk to them, so I can kind of get to this. But having strong councils is going to be helpful in this, because that's the one challenge that I have that we're also trying to work on is getting stronger councils. And we got great representation at McDougal, better representation at Hoover now. But a lot of our sites don't have that, where instead of them having to go through the manager, that they can actually deal with us directly through their resident councils. And that, hopefully we can build a better relationship in terms of, here's what we're doing, here's where we're at. Tell me if this makes sense and if this sounds right in terms of what the progress that we're making.
That was a little,
sorry, you're breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat that?
that was the last comment. So
okay. All right. So are there any questions on RAD? I assume not. It's been up for a minute. So I'm just going to move on to what is happening with DDMP. You know, again, this was launched in 2019 after well over a year of planning and community engagement. We are proposing at least 2,500 units. So we're going from 447 to up to 2,500 units. Inclusive of that is replacing all 447 of those units that were considered public housing. And then we'll have a variety of other incomes that we'll be serving as well. And one of the reasons why that is important, because a lot of this conversation we've been having has to do with the available financial structure of these properties. Public housing has been 100% reliant on the federal government. With these deals that we're structuring now, we're providing a variety of rent structures, which means we're getting more revenue into that development, so we'll be able to maintain that property over time. As I said, new construction or rehab of 2,500 units. In fact, there's only 177 of those 2,500 units that are going to be rehabbed. That's the J.J. Henderson Towers. That work has already started. Everything else will be tearing down and rebuilding the existing units that are on those sites, We estimate this will take over 10 years to do. The budget is well over $500 million. And again, it's the 7, really 8 properties that are involved, and 5 of those are, or really 6 of those are DHA controlled. And I want to point out that the Liberty and East Main Street site, the DHA office combined with the criminal justice building is site, as well as the Forest Hill Heights sites, are all targeted to utilize the $59 million from the $95 million bond. So this is what those 6 sites look like when you kind of bring them all together. These are our projections for those. So the Hunt Street Station is over, which is now currently where the Community Development Department is, the top right. Coming down, you see the Liberty Street and East Main Street development. That'll be well over 500 units on that site, plus some retail and commercial on Main Street. The Fayette Place site also projected to have well over 500 units. The South Side 3, I believe it's 122 units that are projected for that site. Forest Hill Heights would bring over 500 units. The J.J. Henderson site, which is the only site that has actually started construction on. So the renovation of that building has now begun, and the new construction is expected to start in April of this year. And then the last site on the list is the DHA office combined with the Criminal Justice Center site. And just to kind of let you know where we are, and again, this is showing you those sites and the kind of order that we are expected to do them, and the number of phases that each of the sites would have, how many of them have, how many of those phases have 9% low-income housing tax credits. If you recall, I said this will be about 10 years development time. The primary reason that it's going to take 10 years is because we have several phases of 9% tax credits, and you can only get one 9% tax credit project per year in the city of Durham. So even if we wanted to get 2, we couldn't, because the way the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, which is a state agency that controls that low-income housing tax credit program, only allows 1 award per year in Durham. So that's the reason why this gets dragged out over 10 years. We probably could cut that to maybe half, or maybe 6 or 7 years, if we didn't have the constraints of the 9% low-income housing tax credit program. And this is kind of showing you where we are now. Again, the J.J. Henderson, both rehab and new construction sites. This is what that new construction building is going to look like, something like that. It's going to have a total of 80 units on that site. The closing happened literally on the last day of the year in 2020, December 31st, 2020. And again, the construction is expecting to start here in this quarter, completing in 2022. This is the Liberty Street and 519 East Main Street site. So if you recall back at the original, where I showed you where we were, the different sites and how much it costs and the number of phases, this site had originally projected 3 phases. Now that we have engaged a developer, it's actually been broken out into 5 phases. It originally had 533 units, but now there's going to be 577 units. So one of the lessons in this is that once you start this, because we've laid out plans that can be built, and we consider those to be the floor. But once we actually get that development partner on board, then the rubber meets the road, and they actually refine that particular effort. And we then will determine exactly what it's going to look like, how many units they'll have. But what we projected is the floor. We expect more and not less. So in the case of this, we do get more units, but we also got more phases, and that's okay too. But this is what's happening with it now, where you see phase 1 at the top right corner. The work on that is scheduled to start before June of this year. I think it's probably either April or May. I think May of this year is when we're looking to start phase 1 of that. And then phase 2, we have put in a funding request for that site last month. We expect to hear back by August as to whether it will get its low-income housing tax credit funding. And if it does, we'll begin work earnestly on that this time next year. And these are sort of what you call massing models. Don't pay too much attention to the materials and and kind of what it looks like, but just you look at it in terms of the blocking of like kind of the height and size of the buildings. But this is that East Main Street and Liberty Street apartments. This would be if you were hovering over the Durham Housing Authority site, you know, in the air and looking back over that site. The DSS building is what you see kind of blurred out on the right. This is another view of the same site. This is if you were standing over the police station headquarters, kind of in the air and looking back over that site. This will give you a sense of what it looks like. And this is just a closer in view. Again, if you were standing on top of the police station and started to zoom in, you see the nice sort of Central Park area. There'll be a lot of amenities that will be included on this site. There'll be a lot more activity on the central green space than what's represented here now. Lots of trees and other kinds of activities for the residents of this community. And then I believe, no, there's more. I think this is the last one of this. And this would be if you were at Golden Belt and high in the air and looking back over the site, and this is what you would see. You can see on this side of the site, the buildings are broken up a little bit smaller. That's because you have lower density, in some cases housing over on that side. So you didn't want to have big, tall buildings that were overpowering the more residential look that you see there. So I'll stop here to see if there are any questions on any of the DDMP that has gotten to this point in terms of the designs and the overall look.
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay, and I'll keep moving. One other piece that's really, really important to this is what we call our shared prosperity plan. Because we're talking about $500 million of development, and because we're going to be a partner in all of this development, we thought it was important that we emphasize that we expect to have a lot of minorities be involved in this project in terms of the construction side of this and other areas as well. And we also thought that it was important that we have local hiring done. That is just sort of everyday jobs as opposed to the contractors. So we have put forth what we call the Shared Prosperity Plan, which focuses on MBEs and making sure that we can get as many contractors who are Durham based, that are minority, in particular who are Black contractors, to have an opportunity to work on this. So that's something that we've made clear to our development partners. We've included that in our request for request for partners in this overall. We expect them to work with DHA to make this a reality. In addition to that, we're working with the Office of Workforce and Economic Development. We're working with the Community Development Department as well to make sure that we have the infrastructure to make sure that we can get out and recruit residents from our public housing communities, and in some cases the surrounding areas, so that whatever openings there are, they know about them. We make sure that the contractors know that we have able-bodied workers who are coming from that community as well. One of the challenges when you're dealing with hiring people locally is that you often find that the contractors are like, well, we couldn't find anybody, because their focus is on trying to get the building built, and they're not necessarily going to make that extra effort to go out in the community. Well, we built into this an effort ourselves to make sure that we can get out and recruit people to make them available for the contractor, so they have no excuses in being able to find workers. And lastly, or next to lastly, I wanted to mention that we also have a home ownership effort going on with Habitat. This is in an area over by Edgemont Elms, which is just off of Austin and East Main Street. And they've already got several of these houses not underway, but almost pretty much finished. It's a total of 37 units. There's some on this side. There's also some over by the Franklin Village community. And we're excited about these houses going up and being able to offer affordable home ownership in the downtown area. And then just a couple other things to mention. We Also doing full renovation of Laurel Oaks. In fact, I believe that finishes the end of this month. That was a $1.6 million renovation. Of that, we received $800,000 from the city of Durham, and another $800,000 we put in from our own money. Maureen Road and Demar Court are technically, they finished the initial rehab. We found some significant issues that were not initially covered in the original work for Maureen Road. So we got to go back and do some plumbing repairs there. But Demar Court is up and operational and just about fully leased. Maureen Road is going to take us probably another almost a year to get everything repaired there so that we can get it fully leased. And I believe that's it. So any additional questions that you all might have, I'll be happy to answer.
I'll entertain any questions from the floor. You could just unmute yourself and ask them, or you could put them in the chat. I see no more questions and no more comments.
All right, I would like to, if I could, introduce Anthony Snell, who is our new Director of Development. Anthony, go ahead and introduce yourself if you could.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Snell. I'm the new Director of Development. I am very happy and fortunate to be here with Durham Housing Authority. And as Anthony was commenting earlier on our overall efforts for improvement of our physical, of course, all of our physical housing, certainly a big part of that falls on my table with respect to all of our new development going forward. But certainly, you know, it's part of our shifting paradigm. You know, we're looking at affordable housing from a different perspective. And, you know, we're looking from the lenses that all of our housing should have all the amenities that any other housing that has in the city or across the country. So we're looking at it from that perspective.
Thank you, Anthony. And I would just like to say, for any of you that hear of residents that are having challenges or issues, to please reach out to me directly and just let me know so that I can follow up and determine where my staff has fallen short.
Mr. Scott, again, and it's a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Snell. Welcome to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Scott if he wanted to add anything about Hopwa.
Sorry, about Hopwa?
Yes.
Unfortunately, Danita Johnson, who is she runs the voucher program and she's my COO. She is a Hopwa expert. So Mr. Johnson, I would ask that you help me out on this because I'm not as up to speed on the Hopwa program. I know we've been doing it with you guys for forever, actually, and we'll continue to do so. But the details, I'm afraid I'm a little rusty on.
Okay, then that's fine. What we'll do is we'll arrange another time to do that. Important thing for the members of the Citizens Advisory Committee to know that there are other ways other than development that the city and the DHA have partnerships and relationships as it relates to the entitlement programs, and just not development. There are some programs and they serve as administrators of one of our voucher programs as it relates to Hopwa, which we've talked about, Ms. Conyers has talked about before. We can arrange that for another time. Thank you.
Certainly, and just in general, that it's not just Hopwa, but we also have a partnership with the homeless providers, and we have 200, and I believe it's 25 vouchers that are available for referrals from our homeless providers to make sure that we can get those folks housed as well. And there are a couple other smaller programs that we do. So I would love to be able to come back and do that.
And I appreciate you, Mr. Scott, Mr. Snell, for coming in and talking to our board. I always appreciate your transparency. You are in a tough position. And I mean, like I said, all of us here are community-centered, community focused. And so we do run into folks who are in DHA properties that have a whole host of issues, concerns, and sometimes they don't know where to necessarily go. And so I always want to keep that as a focus for you is, you know, if and for everybody for that matter, if you and your family were living in some of our DHA properties, you know, how would you feel if you felt like you're already at a point in your life or in your situation where you already feel down, and the only thing that you have is the four walls sometimes that you get to sleep under, and within those four walls there's a whole host of issues. And I always want to just keep that as a focus for everybody. You know, when you guys make decisions, and you know you are hearing resident complaints, that there are a lot of residents that don't know what to do and where to go, even if you've told them 1,000 times. And as a teacher, many of us are educators in here. We know that we have to repeat it 1,000 times, the same thing. So just, you know, that's just my little 2 cents.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you.
No, I appreciate that. And I don't disagree with any of what you just said. And, you know, I think one of the things that becomes, we didn't talk much about, we didn't talk at all really about the other stuff that we try to do with our residents that isn't bricks and mortar and, you know, some of our resident services things. But I'll just say this, there is nothing about DHA that I'm satisfied with. My general mantra is that I'm always trying to get better and always trying to make it better. And unfortunately, we're not even at a place where things are operating the way that they should. And so we're dealing with a deficit in some areas. This is not about making excuses. This is just to emphasize that my commitment is there to have DHA serve our residents much better than it has. And that's why I don't mind coming to these types of meetings or, you know, dealing with these things, because the more I have these kinds of engagements, the better I'm able to hear what's happening on the ground, and I can hear either directly or indirectly kind of what my residents are talking about. I try to spend as much time as I can in reaching out to residents directly, but it's still not enough. And sometimes just because of my title, people tend to not be as straightforward as you would like them to be. Or they, as you pointed out, there's kind of this intimidation factor kind of thing. And that's why having the community be able to reach out to me, it becomes a way to help break that down. So I do appreciate the opportunity to be here.
And we will continue to extend the invitation to you. And as you continue to have updates on many of the properties that are under your wing, that you present them to this board and this body, I'm sure that we'll continue to entertain questions to you and any of the people that work with you in this work. So is there any other questions? I would just want to kind of just throw that one more time out there. Is there any questions from the board that need to be addressed to Mr. Scott or Mr. Snow for that matter?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This is, can you hear me?
Yep.
This isn't a question, but I wanted to just make a brief comment. Mr. Scott had mentioned Laurel Oaks, and just to kind of help make the connection with some of the federal funds that are under the purview of the CAC. There were some community development block grant funds, CDBG funds, that help support some of the renovations with Laurel Oaks. So just to another tie in there, just to kind of make sure you're aware of that.
That as always, we always want to know where those dollars go and if they're being used. Any other questions? If not, we can move forward in the agenda.
Thank you all. I'm going to drop off now, and I appreciate you all taking the time today.
Have a good evening.
You as well.
Thank you, Mr. Scott and Mr. Snell.
All righty. I'm going to go right into announcements. I will let folks know on the board that we finally will have our first Affordable Housing Implementation Committee meeting on April the 1st. I got an email. So I will keep the board up to date and abreast on where that bond money is going, how it's going to be used, and anything else that comes out of that meeting. So I will make sure that we as a committee know what's going on there. And I think Mr. Johnson is in charge of that particular meeting as well. So I can hang out with him. He may feed them more than he feeds us, though.
So you think?
But other than that, does anybody have any announcements? Any Mr. Johnson staff, any announcements that were not stated before I got on the call?
No, Mr. Chair, I just want to say thank you for indulging us in the past 2 meetings where we've tried to bring some information directly from on the ground, as was indicated last fall. And so we hope that that information has been helpful to you and your work, as you can see what the impact of the Community Development Department and the federal funds are.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I'm sure that, you know, we always appreciate the openness of staff to our concerns or suggestions, and the fact that y'all are very transparent and willing to accommodate what we ask. We truly appreciate that. Does anybody have any announcements, good news? Any marriages? I don't know. Alicia, you have nothing? I know you, okay.
Nothing.
Okay.
You want to talk about divorces? I mean, I can talk to you about that.
Yeah. This is being recorded.
Okay, sorry.
Other than that, I think our next scheduled meeting will be March the 29th? No, or the 22nd. I think it's the 22nd, right, Matt?
Yes, I believe that's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, so our next meeting won't be until March the 22nd. As always, if you have any suggestions about meetings that you would like for us to have that I could bring up to the staff, please email me or Dr. Langloss or Janice as your executive body members, and then we'll bring that in our next executive body meeting. So other than that, there's nothing else. I'll take a motion to adjourn, and I'll see you all in March.
We shall move to adjourn.
So moved. Have a great rest of your evening. Stay warm out there.
Night.
All right, good night.
Thank
Good night.
you, Onions. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank y'all. Michelle, I got your message. Thank you. And Janice, as always, I appreciate you holding it down.
Sure. Just quick question. So Matt, you're just going to check on that, what we discussed, and then just send it out if it works.
I'll have to pull it out, probably put it in a Word document and send it.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, that's fine. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, like one of them I was able to see, but then like it was like just the last part of the meeting of the text I was able to see, but then like the meat and the potatoes, the bigger part, it wouldn't open it without, I guess, having some type of app.
I'll follow up on that and just if I have to put it in a Word document and see if I can reclaim some of the actual recording as well. So my apologies for that.
And how does I know that sometimes I do have to, Denise does such a great job, but she's busy at times, and I know I have to fill in that role. I see how it's transcribed, but how do you want that in a minutes form? I mean, because it's kind of like you don't want to necessarily cut and paste, but how do you really want if it's already transcribed?
How do I want it? Or
well, I guess
what's the expectation?
What's the expectation? Because it is going into public record, I'm assuming. So,
I mean, the expectation is that it's organized in a, kind of a Word document. Ms. Washington has previously done a pretty good job of paring it down and organizing it into, minutes in a Word document, basically, that people can read. And then we post that on the city's website on the, the individual page for the Citizens Advisory Committee.
All right. I figured that's what it was. I just wanted to double check with this new technology of it.
I mean, I don't know that there's a prescripted sort of way that the clerk expects it, but it's, it should be legible. It's public record, so it should be, the public should be able to access it and just understand what the meeting was, what happened. It doesn't have to be verbatim words the way that I have them in a transcript, but
And do the recordings of these meetings get put on like?
No, we don't post the actual recordings of these meetings. I mean, we have we can get the recordings, but we don't post them. Not that we are trying to hide anything. It's just a technical lift that we just have not had guidance on how to do that yet.
That's all I had. I appreciate y'all.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.